Dude, I usually have my humidifier on for these videos, but last time I had my humidifier on and my door was closed, it was like made my room really muggy. I left my room and when I came back, I thought it was a fire and I got scared, and then I was like, oh wait, I had my humidifier on that whole time. So I love having my humidifier for the vibes, but unfortunately there's not going to be any vibes today, especially because it's really hot, so I don't need my room to be muggy. So hi, my name is Mayana. Welcome to Maya Core, and today I'm going to be doing a video essay. This video essay is actually going to be about, does BookTok have a smut addiction? Also, if you see me like I'm looking at my notes. If that's an issue for you, like, I'm sorry, but I still haven't gotten there yet. I'm working on it, babes. So I was on Twitter and I saw this screenshot, and it was of someone in the TikTok comments asking if crime and punishment had romance. And so the person who posted the screenshot was kind of like making fun of them. And when I was like looking through the comments, like people were like, they were like mocking them, being like, what's the spice level? Does it have spice? And they were like, oh my gosh, like, this is a classic book. They were like laughing, acting as if it was like an unreasonable question, and they started acting as if asking if a classic had romance was too much. And I think it's weird because there are classics that are romance books. There's like books like Jane Austen that like have like romance in them. There's also books like 1984 that have like a romance subplot. And so I don't know why people were like acting as if it was just like completely insane to like ask if a book had romance. I just noticed that a lot of the comments were like acting as if people who read romance want smut, and like as if they're like interchangeable. And I just thought that was like insane. This is a topic that I have been thinking about for a very, very long time. And so I actually like messaged some of my friends and I was like, hey, like, what do you think about this topic? Because I want to get other people's point of view. For years, people have shamed women who read romance, and it's no secret that it's because it's a genre heavily dominated by women. Like, for years, people who love Twilight have been made fun of. People who like 50 Shades of Grey have been made fun of. Yeah, they're like shitty things, and the people who read them know that they're shitty. Like, people who are reading Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey aren't sitting there being like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest piece of literature ever. They know that it's not perfect, but they're there for the fun that it brings and the romance that it has. The thriller genre is also dominated by women, but women who read thrillers aren't made fun of or like treated the same way that women who read romance are. Women who read romance aren't taken as seriously. I feel like BookTok really helped women who read romance like feel less ashamed of it, and now it's like a common thing. I literally remember being on BookTube like pre-BookTok, so pre-2020. Well, I mean, BookTok has always been around, but 2020 is when it got popular. I remember being on BookTube pre-2020 and like romance YouTubers not having that many subscribers, and like them being like some of like my favorite people. I would be like, some of these people literally only have like 30K, and it would be like so many people would be like, yeah, I love this channel, but like they wouldn't grow in like subscribers. And I feel like after BookTok, a lot of them now like have like 100K, and it's like people have found that audience. And like me, I love romance. I'm not a heavy romance reader, but I do love romance. I remember there would be like a lot of people being like, oh, I hate reading romance books in the public. I hate reading like these shirtless men in public and stuff like that. Personally, for me, I never gave a fuck, because what are you gonna do, fight me? You're gonna look at me weirdly because I'm reading a romance book? What are you reading? Nothing. Oh, exactly. And I just feel like now, because of BookTok, like women can talk about romance openly and now not be ashamed. I also noticed that BookTok has like helped in the sense that like now men also read romance, and like even though they're not doing it, like I don't believe that men on BookTok are reading romance because they genuinely want to. I do think that they are reading it to get bitches, I am sorry, or get the followers, and it's very obvious to me. But hey, they are reading it. Some of them might be faking it, but I don't think so. Like, I think they might be like faking like how they feel about it and being like, oh yeah, this book was good, knowing damn well it was ass. But it's getting men to read romance, and it's making it more like acceptable for men to read romance, because I think it's important for men to read romance. Like, I know if I'm interested in a guy and he reads and he's not interested in reading romance, I'm gonna be side-eyeing him, because there's nothing wrong with reading romance. I feel like BookTok helped people not feeling shame because of genres like dark romance, mafia romance, taboo romance. Like, they're like really out there. So I feel like it helped people who read like everyday, like published, like simple, like romance not feel ashamed. Because if the people who are reading this really dark shit aren't being ashamed, how come someone who's reading something like really like light and simple not feel ashamed? So I feel like it really helped, because now like people thirst over like biker people and stuff like that, and like they feel like no shame. And I just feel like people who are reading genres that are dark just make people who read normal romance like look better. And with the help of like those genres such as like mafia romance, taboo, and dark romance, smut has become really popular. I mean, that's why those books are so popular in the way that they are today, because of smut. Because I feel like people wouldn't really be reading mafia romance if they weren't getting like smut out of it. And I feel like that has like brought its own issues like within today, which I mean we're gonna touch on that today. So I've been in the book community since 2015, and I started reading romance around 2019, and romance has become one of my favorite genres. Romance is an easy genre to read because I read mostly sci-fi and fantasy. Those are my favorite genres, but I read romance as like a palate cleanser. Although romance books now like have been like 400-600 pages, and what's the point of me taking a break from reading a 400 page fantasy to go and pick up a 400-page romance? I just think that's fucking insane, to be honest. But I use romance as like a palate cleanser, although I do feel like romance right now is just not doing it for me. Like, despite the long ass pages, and not like romance right now is really just not doing it for me. So I actually like take a break from romance like very so often. Like last year I decided to not read romance for the latter half of the year, and my reading experience for the rest of the year was so good, especially because romances, even though a lot of them are fucking long now, they still do read quickly. And so my issue is that I'll pick up a bunch of romance even though they're all like mid or terrible, because they're so easy to get through, and like it doesn't take as much brain power as like reading fantasy. And like although I love fantasy, sometimes I really don't want to sit there and like have to like remember so much. Like sometimes I really just want to like watch my YouTube videos, lay in my little chair, and read on my fucking Kindle. And also I feel like the experience with fantasy, sometimes reading on a Kindle just doesn't like, it just doesn't eat. I love romance, but I just had to take a break from it like every now and then. And I feel like I might have to do the same thing this year, because my reading, like what I've been reading right now, has been mid. And every time I look at why my reading is mid, romance is always at the scene of the crime. I personally don't really like a lot of smut. I used to. Like back in 2019 when I first joined, I wanted books to have smut so much. I think because back in 2019, like romance wasn't that big of a genre. Smut and romance wasn't that big of a deal. Like it wasn't really like there for real. And so I remember being like, oh, like I wish books had smut. Like I hate a Fade to Black book. Mind you, one of my favorite books, The Unhoneymooners, is Fade to Black, and I love that book. And also I've read almost every Christina Lauren book after that, and they have not ate like the way that The Unhoneymooners did. So I really wanted smut in my books back in 2019. I really don't know. I think it's just because I was like young and like inexperienced, and I just wanted to like read more about it. And I love smut and fan fiction. And then as I got older and like BookTok became a thing in 2020, and like smut became actually popular, and like now you cannot pick up a romance book without smut. Now I find myself skimming the smut scenes. Like now a lot of times like I'll just like not even read it. Dude, sometimes a book will be like, a smut scene will be like 4 or 5 pages. I really feel like smut takes away from like chemistry now, and I think a lot of authors have replaced chemistry with like smut. I just feel like it's just not, I don't know, I'm just like really tired of smut. Like I don't give a fuck. And if I really want to like read smut to like gain something from it, I'll just read a monster romance, because it's like 100 pages and they're like really quick and they get to the point. And I love monster romances because they're also like very diverse. So like if I'm reading smut, I want to read something with a character who like looks like me, and 9 times out of 10 I am gonna find that from like a monster romance or a really short novella. I really don't know why people like, why you would read a whole 400-page romance just to gain like one particular thing from it. And then it's like the sex scenes are like all the same now, and nothing's very creative. But hey, if that's your cup of tea, that's your cup of tea. I just know for me personally, I just don't care about smut in books anymore. Like that's not something I look for. I actually look for the exact opposite. I feel like there's so many people who read like dark romance and smut right now, and like that's all they want to read and that's all they care about. And I mean, if that's what you want to read, then that's fine. But like it's genuine. Like the reason why I started like a BookTube channel, or the reason why I started like a TikTok, one of my main goals in the book community is to convince people to step out of like their comfort zone with reading. It really pains me to see, like I get it, sometimes like people only like one type of genre and like that's their thing, but I really want to encourage people to get out there and try other genres. Like if you only read horror, like maybe read nonfiction. Like there are nonfiction horror books out there. Like if you only read romance, like maybe read like a fantasy romance. Like Like, I really want people to like really get out of their comfort zone, and I feel like the issue with BookTok is nobody wants to get out of their comfort zone. Dude, there are so many people on there who will be like, I would never read nonfiction. And it's like, nonfiction isn't just self-help book. I've read the craziest fucking nonfiction books about real people, and I just like people on BookTok, they literally like, why would I want to pick up a nonfiction book? There are nonfiction books about romance. There are nonfiction books about like rom-coms and just about romance. There are nonfiction books about couples and their love stories. Like, if you want romance that bad, like, you can find it in nonfiction. And so my issue with BookTok is that they just don't know how to step out of their comfort zone. It's like, once they start reading something, that's the only thing that they read. And so I feel like with the dark romance and smut girlies, like, there are people who read dark romance and smut, and that's not the only thing that they read, and that's totally fine. Like, I'm not talking about that. There are people who literally only read dark romance and smut, like, every fucking book, which I feel like has to be like crazy. Like, I feel like that has to be like, I don't know, I'm not like a licensed psychologist or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, I feel like that has to be fucking up like your psyche, like picking up dark romance after dark romance after dark romance and just reading like smut. And like, I used to make book talks about people who read too much smut, and I used to feel like, you know, people who like read too much smut were like weird or whatever. And, well, not weird, but like, I stopped making them because it's like, I didn't want to group everyone on BookTok in like the same, because I was also on BookTok. I didn't want to group everyone on BookTok in the same thing. Like, just because you read smut doesn't mean that like you read a bunch of smut, you know? Like, reading porn is never, I feel like reading porn isn't as bad as like watching porn. Like, because with porn, like, there are women who are like being victimized, there are women who are being trafficked, and women underage, and it's just like not good. Whereas with reading it, it's like there aren't real women being victims of it. But that's not to say that there still aren't issues from reading smut, because I feel like when you're reading like all these dark romance, like, these women are over the age of like 21, hopefully. And also, like, I'm not even gonna get into the topic of like how children are like reading smut as well, and like they're reading books like Haunting Adeline, which, if you don't know what that book is, it's literally about a girl who has a stalker, and it's like very like smutty, and like they do like really like, they're just doing like very sexual things, and that kids just shouldn't be reading. But we're not even gonna talk about that. But it's like, these are like grown women who are like over like 21, 25, and it's like their brain cells, like, they're not computing like how fucking weird this is. Like, apparently there's this man who was arrested for killing like, I think 3 women, and BookTok was like thirsting over him, and he had like and it was because like he had like a bunch of tattoos, and like the comments were like, BookTok, where y'all at, and like blah 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 blah, and which happens like every fucking time. Like, it's always a BookTok where y'all, even like the bikers on TikTok, you see a man with a motorcycle, better fucking believe you open them comments, BookTok, where y'all at? Oh my gosh, my husband keeps asking me, why am I playing the same sound over and over? It's usually always like a woman who's 21 who like just got into this, or like a woman who's 40 whose husband obviously isn't putting it down for it. There's so many issues like this where it's like people who read smut have like lost their fucking minds. But I do want to reiterate that it's not everyone. Like, just because someone is reading smut, it's not everyone, although it is a lot of people. And there's a lot of instances. There's like a situation where there's this young boy who like was on TikTok, and I think he was like 16, and he was like talking about how, I think it was like talking about how he was like reading the Hunger Games, and there was like a bunch of like older women in the comments being like, don't corrupt him. Like, there were people like recommending him like smut to read, and all he wanted to do was talk about his little Hunger Games, his child age appropriate Hunger Games, okay? And I'm not saying that kids can't read smut or whatever, but there are sex scenes in YA books meant for children to read. In adult smut, there are things that like adults already compute. Like, there are things that should be discussed, like consent, and like sometimes in like the dark romances they don't talk about consent. Consensual not consenting is a thing, or even not consenting, but a child isn't able to like understand that, like, what that is, or like really understand like where that comes from, or why people like read those type of things. It's just like how important smut is. And I think it's actually really dangerous to like recommend a young man. It was just so fucking weird, and there were like so many women in that comment being like, let's not corrupt him, he's one of the good ones. And it felt like grooming, because this is a child. Get out of his comments. If you don't just be like, oh my gosh, it's so great that you're reading the Hunger Games. There was the whole Kiara Lewis situation where so many people have videos on it. Like, I'm pretty sure you can just type in Kiara Lewis, but it was a situation where she was like working with this hockey company, and she was like saying really inappropriate things about this like specific hockey player, or the hockey player players in general. Like, I think the team was called the Krakens, and she would say things like, he can crack my back, or he can crack my... I think ESPN made an article about it. But anyways, yeah, so basically one of the players' wives got on here and was like, hey, actually, I'm uncomfortable with you talking about my husband in this way. Like, my husband uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable. And Kiara Lewis was basically like, oh, well, you weren't saying that 3 months ago. As if the thing about consent, the crazy thing about consent is that it could be given and taken away any moment you want. Any moment you want. And that whole situation was just absolutely fucking disgusting, to be honest. To like sit here and be like, oh well, like trying to paint the wife as like a villain for being like, hey, like actually I'm very uncomfortable with the way you sexualize my husband, because they were sexualizing that man. It's like smut is so oversaturated to the point where like if you are recommending a book that like you genuinely loved and you're like, oh my gosh, it was so good, I'm about to recommend this on BookTok, better fucking believe, is there smut? What's the spice level? Does it have any spice? How spicy is this book? And it's even to the point where people will ask that with a fucking YA book, which I think is insane. Because if you want smut that bad, there are books out there with smut. Hop your ass on Google. I low-key forgot where I was because my camera overheated. But we are greeted by my cat, Apple. Say hello, Apple. She says, fuck you bitches. That was so mean. I don't know where she gets it from. Basically what I was saying is, it's so disheartening when you are talking about like a book that you really, really enjoy, and then all the comments are like, does it have smut? Like, what's the spice level? Like, one time I had read this book that I really love called Lipsticks and Camera Clicks, and I posted about it on TikTok, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a love triangle, but you guys need to read it. And so many of the comments was like, does it have smut? Is it spicy? Like, literally all the comments. And I actually stopped answering the questions because I wanted people to like read it for themselves and find out. But also, there's always going to be somebody in a Goodreads review that tells you if a book has spice or not. To be honest, I end up making a video responding to somebody and being like, hey, like, I just feel like it's really weird to rather you want to read a book based off if it has spice or not. I did learn from that video that sometimes people are asking because they are uncomfortable with spice, and that is definitely understandable. But all the comments are not with people who are like, what's the spice level? Those are not people who are uncomfortable with spice. And the author actually ended up DMing me and being like, they were just saying like they felt like people weren't gonna read their book because it's not very spicy. And it was so crazy because I actually felt like the chemistry in that book was some of the best chemistry I had read in a while. Like, I felt like there were some scenes in that book where you could see where the characters were falling in love with each other, and I just thought that was like so crazy that people were like judging rather they want to read a book based off of if it has smut or not, which is wild. You should be judging based if you want to read a book or not based off of how good it is or the writing, not the fucking smut. That should be the least of your worries. And now I feel like smut is starting to become something that like people are against. Like, it's to the point where if you read smut at all, like, you are immediately like deemed as like weird and somebody who like reads smut, even if it's not like, I know for me, I skim over smut often, and like I only read smut when like I really, really like want smut. Like, so if I really want smut, I'm gonna read a 100-page smut book. I'm not about to sit there and read 400 books for the smut. So I only read smut when like I want to, because I don't like consuming like porn. I skim over smut a lot of the times, but I personally wouldn't go around making fun of people for reading it. And I did make videos about people who consume a lot of smut, but honestly I felt so guilty that I just stopped talking about it like altogether, because I really saw how it was like affecting people on BookTok, and I never want to make someone feel like shit for what they like to read, even if it is shit. Okay? And it's like anybody who reads smut is automatically like deemed as weird. Like, there was this one time I had gotten into a Twitter argument with someone, and they were saying like people who read smut are weird, and I like said something, and I was like, and basically I ended up saying how I read like 50 smut books last year, and they were like, oh my gosh, like that's a lot, bitch. And I was like, I read 300 books a year. That's actually not a lot. And they're like, no, like even for 300 books, that's still a lot. And I'm like, that's 17% of my reading. I'm reading 4 smut books a month. Like, that's not a lot. And considering how many genres I read, 4 romance books is like not a lot. I probably read like 5 to 7 books in like a few genres a month. So reading 4 smut books really isn't like that much. And like BookTok has this negative connotation now, like anybody who reads smut is automatically like weird, and like now people think that if you are on BookTok you read smut and you're weird. I've even fell into that. Like, when people call me like a book talker, I'm like, no, I'm not a book talker. I am somebody who talks about books on BookTok, but I am not a book talker. And I feel like the word book talk is always used in a negative way. And there's so many different sides of book talk. There are people who read fantasy, people who read sci-fi, people who read horror. I know because I read a lot of those genres, so I follow a lot of those people. It's like now people who like those people who don't even probably read smut are now being grouped into people who read a lot of smut. Even me, as someone who reads romance, I am now automatically grouped into people who read smut. And I mean, it's fine, like I do read smut. Basically, my issue is that people who read romance period are now being grouped into people who read smut. And people who look at BookTok and smut, they think, oh, these people are really weird. There is a side of BookTok of people who lack boundaries, like they really don't understand what boundaries is, which is so crazy because I feel like with smut, boundaries should be discussed a lot. Do understand though, because there is a lot of elitism from people who read classics, and they automatically think that they're better than people just because they read classics. And I read classics. Some of my favorite books are classics. I've read so many classics. One of my favorite books is The Picture of Dorian Gray. I fucking love that book. There's so many classics that I've read and I enjoy. I read classics, especially in September. I love reading classics. In September, that's when I read the most of them. But I don't read only classics because I really want to read everything that's offered out there. I genuinely don't know what it is, but I just want to read everything that authors have to offer, especially new things, because I do want to be in the conversations that people have when I do enjoy the book, because I am a critical reader. So when I do enjoy the book, I want to be in these conversations. And I feel like people have this really, they think that you should only be reading classics, and I understand it because a lot of these books out now are shit. I'm not taking either side, because a lot of the books that are being written right now, which I'm actually gonna do a video on that, and publishing, and how I feel in 5 years from now, we're gonna look back at what was being published this year, and we're gonna be like, girl, what the fuck were we reading? Because a lot of things that are genuinely being published now are insane, genuinely shit. But also, people who read classics are assholes to people who read only smut, and they think that just because you read romance, you're automatically a smut reader, and that's not true. And they also think that just because you read smut, you're automatically a freaky ass bitch who's always who has no boundaries or issues with consent, and that's also not true. The point of this video is that I feel like there are a lot of bad seeds on BookTok. I feel like there are a lot of people who have issues with consent and issues with boundaries, and they don't really understand, or they do understand, they just don't give a fuck. And I do feel sometimes the books that they're reading is kind of fucking up their brain. But I'm not a psychologist. This is just from my perspective. I just feel there is an issue with people who read only smut, and they are weird, and they lack boundaries, and they lack issues with consent. But just because you read smut, just because I read 2 or 3 smut books, doesn't make me solely and only a smut reader. And just because I read romance does not mean I read smut. And I basically feel we were at such a good point because of TikTok, where people who read romance weren't really being judged the way that we used to. When Twilight came out, or 50 Shades of Grey, we weren't being judged. Editing me here, but I wanted to pop in and clarify that I know that 50 Shades of Grey is actually a smut book, and I don't know why I kept saying 50 Shades of Grey. I think it's because I couldn't think of another super popular romance book that was hated at the time, especially because 50 Shades of Grey is a variant of Twilight. It came out because of Twilight. So I don't know why I brought up 50 Shades of Grey when it literally is smut, and it's kind of it's not really helping my point that I'm trying to make. I don't think it's necessarily hurting it either, but it's definitely not helping. But I just want to say that yes, I am aware that 50 Shades of Grey is the smut book that I was talking about in this circumstance, but let's just pretend I said a different really popular romance book, the way that we used to. And now because of smut, we're getting back to it, and it's not just smut readers, it's anyone who reads romance in general. They're now being grouped in that. And I feel it is an issue with elitism, but I also do think that BookTok needs to get out of their comfort zone. They need to stop only reading romance, or reading only one type of only reading smut. I guess basically I'm just saying to try and be more open-minded for both sides, basically. And if you want to read classics, that's fine. If you want to read smut, that's fine. Just be normal. That is the point of this video, is to just be fucking normal. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.